Some of the world's most sophisticated weapons have a shelf life on the battlefield of just 2 weeks, as the frantic pace of the arms race sees Russia and Ukraine leapfrog each other with their drones.
Just inside a tank on our way into Gaza. There is rubble and destruction as far as you can see.
They're digging in their positions, they're practicing. Pinpoint accuracy over targets is what has transformed so much of this conflict.
This is World at War. I'm The Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey, and joining me today is Dr. Jack Watling, land warfare expert from the Royal United Services Institute here in London. Jack, you've done a lot of research on Ukraine and specifically on drones. What is happening week by week that means that some drones effectively becoming redundant?
So almost all modern weapon systems, and what in many ways differentiates them from previous weapon systems, rely on communication of data. And that may be radar returns, so they're pushing out radar energy and it's coming back and they're using that to interpret the environment. It may be communication links, so they are pushing video out or they are receiving instructions in. It may be navigational signals, so satellites that are broadcasting time-stamped signals that they are receiving to understand where they are in the world. And if you understand what a particular UAV is relying on to function, then you can push energy at it, which mimics what it is supposed to receive. And at that point, it will start behaving in ways that differ from how its designers intended it to function.
Is that jamming you're describing?
Jamming, spoofing, yeah. There's a range of techniques, but it is essentially pushing electrical energy at the object.
And what does that mean? What has that meant for the drones being used in Ukraine?
Well, what it means is that when a drone is launched, the first time it launches, the enemy doesn't know how it works, but they start measuring the electronic signals that are going to the drone and coming off it. And so then they start calibrating their own emitters and start testing what effects they can have against it. And so over about a 2-week period, you see the reliability of the drone, its ability to keep functioning as it gets over enemy systems, degrade, unless you update the software, change the frequencies, alter how it's receiving the information. If the enemy shoots one down, and they then understand what the hardware on the drone is doing in terms of interpreting the signals, then they can start pushing signals into it that change the way it behaves. And at that point, they can hijack the system. And so within, let's say, 6 to 12 weeks, you're talking about swapping out actual hardware, not just reprogramming, in order to make sure that the enemy can't knock out your drones at scale.
And when you say hijack,
yeah.
What does that mean? What have you seen happening in Ukraine?
I mean, the basic one is hacking into each other's video feeds so that you can see what they're seeing and shoot what their drones can see. More sophisticated would be either convincing the drone that it is somewhere other than where it is, so that if it's, let's say, supposed to land on a target, it lands in the wrong place. Or
and when you say land, that we might be talking about one of these first-person view drones,
explosive.
An explosive drone.
Exactly.
So you can turn a drone back on the people who launched it,
or force it to crash so that it's doesn't harm anyone. Or you can actually just take control of the UAV, but it depends on level of encryption, what tools you have in that location, what type of drone it is. So it's not simple, but it's entirely doable.
And which side is either side winning the drone war?
There are differences between them. So I'd say the Ukrainians have a huge array of quite innovative organizations that are producing these UAVs. And the result is that they adapt around problems faster than the Russians. So when the Russians come up with something that's a big problem, the Ukrainians find ways around it. The problem the Ukrainians have is that these are all quite small organizations, so they test this stuff at small scale, and the Russians start building countermeasures before the Ukrainians ever scale the effect that they're delivering that exploits the gaps and the weaknesses they've found, which means that the Ukrainians have continual success, but limited success. On the Russian side, it's a much more centralized scientific process. And so their update speed is slower. But when they roll out a new drone or a new system or a new approach, it tends to happen at scale. And so it tends to cause a much bigger problem until the Ukrainians can find a solution, which means that the tempo at which Ukraine and Russia are gaining or losing the advantage is very different.
And Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has talked about, the UK government has talked about sort of sending over tens of thousands, if not more, possibly 100,000 drones this year, huge numbers of them. Is that Western support making a difference, or is actually Ukraine's sovereign industry the key pillar here in their defence?
There are different kinds of systems. The drones that have been, there are a lot of UAVs that you just expect to lose at an alarmingly high rate, right? And you treat them the same way you would a grenade. And for those UAVs, as long as they don't cost too much, the fact that the enemy has a very good electronic warfare solution to it doesn't matter. And Ukraine needs as many as they can, and so their international partners providing them is great. There are other drones where you want to assure that it can get from A to B, or you need it to have a sustained ability to get over the lines and detect targets for artillery. And in that case, the question is this refresh rate. And so the international community providing components and providing platforms is great, but the thing that makes that sustainable in country are the Ukrainian engineers who can get in there, keep the software updating, cannibalize the components, swap things out, etc. So there's a relationship between the two. And
I know you spent a lot of time in Ukraine. What have been the most sort of standout drone moments for you over the last 2+ years?
I think seeing how vital planning is in the process. It's all the stuff behind the UAVs that you don't see. The ability to get an electromagnetic survey and have an operator who understands what they're looking at and can plot a route through the jamming so that they can assure that they get the drone back and they achieve the mission. It's a high level of knowledge, and it comes with a particular set of skills. And of course, they need that back-end support, meteorological data, intelligence on the enemy air defense, etc., to be able to function in that way. So understanding the back end was impressive. The other thing was appreciating the complexity of identify friend or foe. Is it an enemy drone or a friendly drone? A huge number of drones in Ukraine are shot down by their own side because you would rather not have an enemy drone above you, so you do something about it. And another major challenge is that you can defeat a drone often without destroying it. If you are able to slow down getting data off it, then the fact that it's found you doesn't necessarily mean the enemy can do anything about it. And so, I've been with drone units that have taken 4 to 6 hours to be able to actually get the data that they have to someone who can do something with it. Which means that when the British Army and others talk about the need to have a digital backbone and the need to invest in that back-end capability, it's really important. Getting that right is the difference between those systems being useful and those systems not being useful.
Jack, thank you very much for joining me on World at War. I'm the Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you have any questions for me or Jack, please ask them in the comments below, and we will try to answer some of them next week.